So let's just go over the quiz real quick. If you scored between 0 and 26, you probably have a strong appreciation of God's unconditional love and acceptance. If you scored in this area, you're probably pretty solid with your identity. You probably know who you are. You mean, not to say there aren't little trip ups, because we all have that, right? But you're pretty good, and you probably don't have a whole lot of needing to look back. If you scored between 27 and 36, you may have a small fear of judgment only in certain situations. So there may be a situation that you just can't seem to get past, but other places you're probably pretty good. 37 to 46, you probably have a moderate fear of judgment influences. Your emotional problems are sometimes rooted in a sense of shame. So if you score in this middle section, shame is really trying to get a hold of you. And you may find yourself in some situations where it's a little bit overwhelming for you like I said, in some circumstances. If you scored between 47 and 56, shame forms the backdrop of your life. There are a few days when you do not experience the effects of shame. This is when shame is starting to really take hold and get a grip on you, and you probably don't feel really positive about yourself much of the time. And if you scored between 57 and 70, you probably have an overwhelming sense of shame. You probably feel steadily depressed, and you probably experience your experiences of shame probably fill your memories. If you're in this last area, you probably live a life of shame. And when I say depression, let me clarify that I'm not talking about a clinical physiological depression. I'm talking about something rooted in emotions. If you see a doctor and you take like antidepressants because you actually deal with a physiological depression, I'm not telling you to stop taking your medicine. It's nothing. I'm not going there. I'm talking about a shame that's rooted in your identity, not a depression that's rooted in identity, not that's rooted in your physiological body. So before we jump into how shame happens, I want to talk about the difference between guilt and shame, because sometimes we don't understand the difference, and what we think is guilt is shame, and shame is guilt, and it just gets kind of confusing. But guilt is what we should experience as soon as we sin. So if we do something bad, we start to feel guilt, and we don't want to feel that. It doesn't feel good. So we go to God and we're like, oh, we did something wrong. Guilt is more like conviction from the Holy Spirit. So we do something wrong, we feel conviction, and it points us to the Father. That is a positive thing. When we do something bad, we should run to our Father. But shame has a completely different story. Shame is a tool of the enemy. Shame is a problem. Shame is a fear of being humiliated. It's a fear of being found out. You do something wrong and you're afraid somebody's going to catch you in it. Or it's a fear of being rejected or abandoned if you don't do something right all the time. And this is often happening, like I said, on a very subconscious level. It's not always something that you're thinking about, but it's something that motivates you in other areas. We don't realize what we're feeling is shame, but we're acting out of shame. So while guilt leads us to God, shame makes us turn from God and want to hide because we don't want to be found out and we feel like there's something really wrong. Guilt reflects what we do, and shame reflects who we think we are. So one is action and one is identity. Here's what the Bible says about sin, about the guilt we feel. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's Romans 3:23. We all sin, we all mess up, we all feel that guilt. That's human. That's being a human being. It has to do with what we do. Here's what it says about our identity or who we are. Psalm 139:14 says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. It doesn't say when I mess up, I am worthless and I am flawed and I'm just a mess. It doesn't say that. It says that we are an image bearer of Christ. That's Genesis 1:27. We're an image bearer of Christ. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. That's the story that God has written over our life. So we're going to talk today about two opposing stories. We have God's story and we have the enemy's story. I'm going to talk just quickly about God's story, and then we're going to talk about shame and the enemy's story, and then we're going to talk about what God's response to what the enemy wants to do is. God's story over every person in this room is, you are a son and a daughter of God. You were created for beauty. You were created for creativity. You were created to live a life of joy. You were created for love. You were created to be seen and to be known and to be heard. Your life matters. Every single person in here, if you are here, if you are alive, if your heart beats, you matter, and you're a child of God, and He has good for you. You were created to thrive in relationships and to have intimacy. The enemy has a very different story that he wants to tell. And the whole goal of the enemy's story is to alter God's story. The whole goal is to separate you from God and to isolate you and to make you withdraw. Back in Genesis 3, and I'm not going to read the text, but you can go there if you want to. We know the story, Adam and Eve in the garden. They're naked and they're unashamed. They are happy. They are living their life. But it's interesting that God chose the words. In writing the Bible, He inspired those words that they were naked and unashamed. Sometimes I wonder, why didn't He say they were naked and happy, or they were naked and felt no fear, or whatever it was? But He chose the words, they were naked and unashamed. And this points to the fact that shame is something we need to take note of. Because what happened was they took the fruit, they ate it, and suddenly they realized their eyes were open. They realized they were naked and they were ashamed. And it wasn't about what they did. Yes, that what they did caused it, but they were naked, and so they took the fig leaves and they covered themselves. They hid because they were ashamed. And when God came walking through the garden, they didn't want Him to find them. And that's what we do. We hide from each other. We hide from our families. We hide behind masks, right? We don't want people to see who we really are. We only portray like a certain, we want people to see a certain thing. Like you get on social media and you think that somebody's life is this glorious life, but inside there's so much more going on. Behind the scenes, there's so much more because we're ashamed. And so we hide because of our circumstances. We hide because we're afraid, and we hide from God. So here's how shame develops. In life, things happen, right? We all have disappointments. We all have fears. We all have failures. We all have hurts. We all have these things that happen to us in life. And in a perfect world, these hurts come, and we take them, and we have people who walk with us, and we take them to God, and we process through them, and we resolve them, and everything's great. And it just then becomes part of our story, part of our testimony. But that doesn't always happen. And so what happens is we have these failures and these setbacks and these disappointments. Sometimes there are words spoken over us, like how many times have we heard, shame on you, or you should be ashamed of yourself, or, all the different things, or maybe you were bullied and you were told that thing over and over and over. Maybe it was even like just teasing or sarcasm. But those things take root. If we don't process through them, if we don't deal with them and resolve them, they begin to take root and they start to intertwine with who we think we are. Maybe you were rejected, maybe by a peer group, or personal story. My husband was let go from his job not long ago, and it took a little while for him to resolve those emotions because he started to feel very like it was him, like there was something wrong with him because of what happened. Maybe you were neglected. Maybe you were abused physically, emotionally, spiritually. Or maybe there was just family dysfunction. Like you have a set of rules in your family, or those those secrets that no one's allowed to know, but you don't talk about them and they remain hidden. And when these things become hidden, you start to internalize them. And you think about them over and over and over until they do take root, and it starts to become who you think you are. It changes your story. It changes God's story. And so there's the cycle of shame. Either we hide, sometimes we do both. We hide, or we run to other things to try to make us feel better about ourselves because we're not feeling really good and we're hurting and we're in pain. And so we run to other things to try to make us feel good about ourselves. And I have a list of things that'll be up here on the screen. Oh wait, did I jump ahead? Okay, never mind, I jumped ahead. I'm going to regroup here just a second. No shame. No, I don't have any shame. I'm good. I'm sorry if you guys are feeling awkward at the moment. That is not my intention, but I'm okay, and I'm really okay. So shame is reinforced when we're unable to resolve these things. We have the cycle of shame. We either hide or we go to these, or we, you know what, I'm just going to go there because that's where I want to go. We go to these empty wells. We go to these places, I'm just going to go. We go to these places that we're looking for to fill us up. So either it could be like shopping and addictions. It could be shopping. It could be pornography. It could be lifting weights. It could be food. It could be the internet, TV, whatever it is. We have these places that we go because we think we're going to find ourselves in those things, and we think they're going to make us feel better. But then we go to those places and we do them, and then it just becomes this cycle of like we do it and then we feel worse, and so then it presses it down even farther, and so then we have to run to it again, and then it pushes it down even farther until suddenly we become those things. But we don't. That's the story the enemy wants us to think. That's what the enemy says. Instead of resolving those things and saying, like, I feel angry, it becomes, I'm an angry person. Instead of saying, I just lose all the time, I never win. Oh, I must be a loser. Or I have been rejected so much in my life. I've just never been loved. And working through that, I'm unlovable. Or I'm unworthy. Or whatever it is that we say about ourselves because of the things that have happened to us in our life. I don't even know how to get back on track, you guys. I am not kidding. I have gone off the rail. So, here's what it looks like practically in our lives. There's going to be a list up here on the screen. And you can, sorry guys. There's black and white thinking, and there's vulnerability, fear of vulnerability, that list. Okay, so there's going to be a list up here. And maybe you'll see yourself in some of these things. One that I see a lot is passivity, where life just kind of passes you by, and you watch, and you see other people doing things, and you think it looks good, and you'd really like to do it, but you just don't think it's for you. You just don't think that that thing is for you. Or maybe it's inferiority, where you're always comparing yourself to someone else. You think someone else has this really great life, and you don't understand why your life is such a mess. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of being seen and known and heard. That's the very goal of shame. It's the very goal of shame. And that's what the enemy wants you to believe. The enemy wants you separated. He wants you isolated. He wants you to not walk out the story that God has for your life. But here's the thing. Jesus died on the cross. And when he went to the cross, he took your shame with him. If we're carrying shame, it's because it's a choice to carry it. We don't have to carry shame. God has provided us a way out of it. He has provided freedom for us. It's already done. If we're carrying shame, it's because we are not making the choices to step out of it. Here's God's solution. It's a word called regeneration. And it says when we come to Christ, we are made into a new person inside. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, what this means is that those who become Christians become new persons. They are not the same anymore, for the old life is gone and a new life has begun. Regeneration is not a self-improvement program where you pick up the pieces of your life that you have left over and you try to make something out of them. It's not that. It is God giving you a new start, and it is God saying that there is this unlimited potential in your life, in your family, in your relationships, in your ministry, in everything you do. There's unlimited potential because of what Jesus did. Every single person in here, you are a son, you are a daughter of God. If there's anything to take away, I want you to get that. You're not that thing that happened to you. You're not that thing you've done. You're not that thing you witnessed. You are a son and a daughter of God. You do not have to walk in shackles anymore. There is freedom. There's freedom. God never meant for us to get our identity from that thing that happened to us, from shame. Our identity is rooted in the love of a Father. So this all sounds good, right? How do we do it? How do we do it? Hebrews 12:1-2 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. So first thing, what is this huge crowd of witnesses? These are the people who have gone before us. These are the people who are people of faith surrounding us. We begin this journey not by ourselves, but in the company, in a community of people who can see us the way God created us. We have to be careful to think that we can do this on our own just by sheer willpower. It will not happen. This overcoming shame does not happen on your own, which is a very scary thing because the very thing shame does is wants to isolate us and not share that thing because of the disgrace, the humiliating disgrace that we associate with it. But God is saying there's a better way. Vulnerability is the key to overcoming shame. We have to create these communities around us that say to us the same thing that Jesus heard when he was baptized. When Jesus was baptized, he hadn't done all those amazing miracles. He hadn't raised people from the dead and done all the stuff that Jesus does. But when he was baptized, God said, this is my son whom I love. This is my son in whom I am well pleased. And as a son and a daughter, he says that over every single person in here. If you're here, God is saying over you, this is what he speaks over you right now. This is your story. You are a son, you are a daughter in whom God is well pleased. You are a son, you are a daughter whom God loves. And that is your identity. None of the rest of it. The rest of it, it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters because it needs to be dealt with. But it doesn't speak to who you are. And you do not have to be bound to it anymore. The next part of the verse, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus. So that sin that so easily trips us up is sometimes translated as the sin that distracts us, because that's what shame wants to do. Shame wants to distract us off of who we really, it wants to distract us from who we really are. Sin doesn't want us to look to Jesus. Sin wants us to become internal and to always think about those things that happen to us in our life. However, you know when you walk a dog or my daughter, she's a horse person. When you walk lead a horse, is that what it is? You lead a horse? Thanks, Millie. Wherever wherever the animal's nose is pointed, that's the direction it goes. We're the same way. Wherever we are focused, that's the direction we go. So if we're focused on Jesus, that's the direction we're going. We are going to be looking to him for our identity. We're going to be looking for him for what to do. However, if we decide to let shame's story speak to our lives, then we're going to be isolating ourselves, and we're going to be thinking about those things that happen, and it's going to take us away from God, which is the opposite of what God's story is, because we were created for intimacy with the Father. So we have to intentionally seek out shame. We have to expose it, and we have to reframe it through God's eyes. We have to find out what God says, because that's the truth. We have to foster the relationships that help us hear God's voice of delight over us, because he does sing a delightful song over every person. But we don't hear that sometimes because of our ears are closed to what he's doing because of the shame. And we have to regularly and intentionally reveal our most hidden shame in the context of these relationships that we're going to foster. The end of this verse says, because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. And some translations say despising its shame instead of disregarding. To despise something or to disregard it, this is an intentional act, not a reactive act. So you have to intentionally seek out the shame. You have to look for it. Jesus despised the shame. He didn't ignore it. He didn't stuff it down. He didn't get distracted by it. He sought it out. That's what he does. He seeks it out. And so if we are looking to Jesus, then that's what we are to do. We are to do what we see him doing, and that's what he does, so that's what we need to do. It says, because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. It kind of brings it all full circle. We were created for joy. This is what we were created for. We were created for love. We were created to live a life of abundance. We were created to be seen. We were created to be known. We were created to be heard. We were not created for shame. Joy is at the very heart of our Father. It's who he is. And as image bearers, that's who every person in here is. So if you're not living a life of joy, if you're not living a life of creativity, if you saw yourself in some of those things, then we need to find out where the shame is in your life. Shame is a fear of judgment, but God has given us regeneration, which basically says, I'm complete. I'm whole. I don't have to do anything. I am who he says I am. And that is, I'm a daughter of God. I am going to bring my friend Kira Money up now. And if you don't know Kira, you should get to know Kira because she's amazing. And she is an overcomer. She has walked a path of healing and has a beautiful testimony. And so she's going to share a little bit of how she overcame this whole shame trap.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to have everyone here this morning. Glad you ventured out into this cold, snowy weather and made it here safely. Crazy, isn't it? Just crazy, absolutely crazy. No one was expecting this. So this morning, I just want to share with you that this story, my testimony that I'm getting ready to share with you, is really a story of liberation and how the grace and mercy of Jesus is real. And what I want to share with you this morning is my journey and how everything happened in my life and how shame came into my personal life. So this morning, first service, I shared this in detail, a little more detail than what I have in the past. And honestly, I'm so thankful my family's here this morning. And this first part of my testimony, I actually didn't share this part with my family until probably a year or two or so. But when I was 4 or 5 years old, this was the beginning of my shame. Thought I was going to be able to do better this service.
You are doing amazing.
So Anyway, so at the age of 4 or 5, I was outside, and our neighbor, two teenagers, a boy and a girl, were next door, and they were outside, and there was a ball, and they called me over. I don't even think my mom knew I was missing for very long. But in the course of this time, I was called over there, and we were playing in the backyard for just a moment, and then they invited me inside their home. And these were two people that I had trusted. There was no reason for me not to trust them. But suddenly, something happened that should have never happened to me, and my body was violated. And I'm sharing this because I know I'm not the only one who's experienced something of this nature. And for those of you who have gone through something like that, I say sorry. I'm sorry that you've had to endure that. This is where it started, but it's okay because it gets better.
Yeah.
So when I was 7 years old, again, I experienced something in our home, and it involved my brother and my dad in an interaction that they had. And my brother was getting in trouble. And when I experienced that, I realized that that was not something that I ever, ever, ever wanted to have happen to me. So started the perfectionism and the performance. And during my lifetime, I avoided conflict. I compared myself to other people. I felt like other people had it better. And when I would see characteristics or qualities that they had, I thought, oh, I need to pick up some of that because I did not know who I really was. And so I strived, and I was unhappy with who I was. Then a little later on, well, actually, growing up, we attended church, and at the age of 7, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I grew up in a very legalistic church where it was full of all kinds of do's and don'ts, where the truth was proclaimed, but grace wasn't seen. And out of that came more guilt, more shame. And I saw God, my Father, who supposedly loved me, I saw him as waiting to get me. Like, he was waiting for me to mess up. If I wasn't perfect enough, if I didn't do precisely what I thought I was supposed to do, then he was going to punish me. I remember as a teenager, after a Sunday morning service, walking out to my car, and I was getting ready to get in, and I stood outside my car door, and I was overwhelmed, and I just said, is this all there is? Is this all there is to the faith that I follow? Is this form of condemnation and this feeling that I experience every single day? And a lot of it did stem from past history. I realized that I wanted and needed freedom. And I remember as a young person, probably somewhere between like middle school and high school, and then on after high school, this continual like conversation that I would have with myself about what I had experienced, and thinking, this is what I get to live with, that there's no freedom from this. This is part of my story. This is who I am. Fast forward again, several years later, and God led us here to Life Church. We were attending here at Life Church for probably 2 years, and I realized that there was that I could be freed. That I could be freed from what I had experienced, that there was what we call inner healing or soul care offered here at our church. It's the best form of counseling that you could ever receive, because what it does is it takes you through your trauma or your experiences, your shame, and it liberates you through Jesus. Because Jesus is our healer. He is the one that covers it all. And I I am here to testify today because of having gone through that process, and I'm so thankful because both Tana and my good friend Jacqueline Rich helped me get to the other side. And it was just their presence. It really was going through it with Jesus and realizing that what I experienced, that God already took care of it, that Jesus already took care of it on the cross. My shame died with him on the cross. And because our God is alive, because Jesus Christ is alive, and he has that victory, and he has resurrected life, that we also get to live that resurrected life as well. So there is power in that. And because of that, not only do I have joy and peace in my life, and this is no joke. I mean, I am a different person. And I am on a new journey, and God is taking me into places I thought I would never be walking into. And it's only because of him, because on my own, I'm incapable of doing the things that he wants. And so I just want to encourage each one of you that if you have a need, if any of this resonates with you this morning, that there is healing for you too, and there is hope, and you can be freed, and you will be so thankful for it, and you will never look back, because that's what it did for me. It took those memories out, and I have never gone back to them since. Not one time since I received that healing.
That's good. Thank you. That's what vulnerability looks like. Now, I'm not asking you guys to get up and stand up on the stage and put a microphone in front of you and talk about the things that you've been through. But it starts with a choice to share, a choice to invite Jesus in and let him shine the light on that part of your life that you've kept closed off for so long. So I would ask every person here, where is that shame lurking in your life? And then I would also ask you, what is the story that God does right over your life? What is the good? What is it that he's saying? Because that's what's important.